I started the show today by asking you what you thought, and we got to this just after 4 o'clock as well, of this story yesterday in Montreal West, about 100 people gathering and discussing a panel discussion on something that would basically see or give, I guess, some Quebecers a chance to say, yeah, you know what, we don't want to deal with separation if and when it happens because we know the PQ, things are going the way they are, they could form the next government. So we want to be proactive. And they're talking about something that they discover, or that they called rather, the 11th Province Panel. This was last night. Colin Standish is with the Canadian Party of Quebec. This is a party started just after Bill 96, this before the last provincial election, I guess in anger, in reaction to Bill 96. Then we were kind of quiet, and all of a sudden this is coming up again. Colin Standish is on the line. He is the leader of the Canadian Party of Quebec. Colin, I guess I would want to ask you, we spoke, I guess, going back now about 3 years ago. Why now?
Hi, Aaron. Good to be here. Yeah, it's been a while. Nice to be back on the airwaves. Certainly talking. It's a preliminary, panel and an event to talk about the potential secession that the PQ is high in the polls. It is potentially a PQ government next time. We at the Canadian Party believe in Canadian unity, and to talk about the real issues at stake that. If Canada is divisible, so is Quebec, that constitutional law is on our side. There is a 1998 secession reference, and to call on our federal representatives to stand up, a twofold way. One, stand up at this point in time that we saw some MPs speak out on the Canada Health Act to call the federal government to account. We need more of that to push back against Bill 96 and Bill 21 and Bill 40 by our provincial and federally elected Liberal MPs and MNAs. And then secondly, that the federal government can actually poll Canadians who want to remain Canadian, who want to perhaps go a different direction, so they can actually do that in a preliminary way to put that framework in place before we are at another constitutional crisis, which I believe we are heading towards, quite unfortunately.
Why do you believe we're heading towards that? Based on what?
I think we're sleepwalking into a constitutional crisis in this country. I actually met with a member of parliament today in the Greater Montreal area and articulated that. So there's many things at stake. So the federal government has updated the official version of the Canadian Constitution with Bill 96's amendment, saying Quebec is a nation defined solely by French, the Oath Act, and the Saskatchewan First Act, and saying that provinces can amend our Constitution willy-nilly. We see the notwithstanding clause used to suppress basic human rights and freedoms in Quebec and also other provinces, and applying beyond even the boundaries of Section 2, 7 through 15 to other rights and freedoms. And we see the federal government not just acquiescing, but complicit in the degradation of the Canadian Constitution, and that ultimately to the viability of the Canadian nation state. That's my perception as a constitutionalist and a lawyer. So we need to be proactive on this front.
I have a couple of questions. I understand you're there with Meertis Fossey, who's your party co-chair. Yes. Either of you can sort of jump in if you want to sort of address this. But when I took calls from listeners on this, asking, based on what happened last night, and, I know that Keith Henderson was there as well, talking about this. And at one point, I think the Gazette described it as a rousing reaction of applause after he said, the time is here, let's be prepared. But some people say, you know what, I kind of like the idea, but A, I'm not sure how it will work, and B, it seems a bit extreme to me. You're quoted as saying last night, Colin, we're looking down the barrel of a gun, a potential PQ government in 2 years' time. To some people, that sounds a little too extreme. Is there a moderate sort of angle that you could pursue here without this, or do you feel this is the best way to go?
We don't see ourselves as being extremists. We think this is a moderate stance to defend the Constitution of Canada, to not amend it willy-nilly, not roll over and play dead when people are taking away our basic rights and freedoms and the ability to exist as Canadians in Quebec. So to actually have a democratic movement within the boundaries of law and the Constitution to speak up for basic rights and freedoms, I don't see what's wrong with that, and to do so in an articulate and appropriate and professional way as we did last night. So that's in our attention, and I think it's going well. It really was 100 people in a packed hall on a hot Wednesday evening in August. Any political party, big or small, would be very proud of that, and I'm really proud of that. I feel that there's something in the water there. It really was a successful event yesterday evening, and we look forward to future ones to come.
Okay, it'd be nice if it had 1,000 people as opposed to 100, but I understand. I would ask the question, by the way, in terms of how this would actually work. We've talked about, the idea of Montreal partitioning has come up many, many times in the past. Your idea is province-wide. How do you begin to even understand or, figure out what areas would in fact want to consider staying in Canada, staying Canadian in the event of separation or a referendum? How do you do that?
Maybe I'll let Meertis jump in here after a moment, but certainly there's a variety of different methods. Certainly the call on the federal government to allow for a federally run referendum to seek out who wants to remain Canadian. And
Colin, honestly, why would the federal government want to even step into that? I mean, this is a government that up until now has avoided to do anything in Quebec it possibly could. Why do you think they'd want to do that? I mean, that seems unrealistic.
I doubt they want to, but certainly, that there's a lot of different pressures. I think a lot of non-francophones, Anglophones, Indigenous people, and Federalist francophones have been dismayed with the federal government, with the Liberal Party of Canada, with their stance on what the CAQ has done for the last 5 years, or 6 years rather. And I think that the right pressure. I think that it's mounting. I think there will be pressure on MPs. Had a great constructive meeting today, and once again, I think it's a viable idea. I'll let Meertis jump in here too. I don't want to dominate the conversation today.
I think it's their responsibility, and sometimes you don't feel like doing the right thing, but you have to do the right thing, and the federal government really ought to do this, and it's a democratic and peaceful way of making sure that Canadian citizens are protected, that their rights are protected, and it doesn't have to be done in any kind of aggressive way. But when you have let's take like a marriage that isn't working. This could be an amicable divorce. This could be a divorce where everybody ends up happier. And instead of waiting for things to become acrimonious, why don't we get ahead of it? Do this in a really rational, peaceful way. Everybody gets what they want. It's in the best interest of everyone for the federal government to oversee this.
Well, in your opinion, I'm sure the federal government doesn't necessarily feel that way. As I said, they've done everything they can to not kind of delve into provincial politics for their own particular reasons. I think we know that. I wonder, though, there's a provincial election only after the next federal election. What if another government is elected federally? Does it make a difference? Say the Conservatives win the next election. Would you approach them the same way?
Sure. Hopefully they'll be responsive and take that seriously in the way that we're hoping that the current government will. I mean, the responsibility of the federal government doesn't change because of who's in government at the time, right? The responsibilities are there, and the Constitution should be upheld. So hopefully there'll be a response to that doesn't have to do with who the leader is.
Who are you making this appeal to in the federal government? Is this local MPs that you'd be working through? How would it work?
Well, we've been working at all levels. We started out by sending a letter requesting that this be taken seriously or into consideration. We haven't yet received a response to that. We also went and spoke on Parliament Hill in the press gallery, again, requesting some appealing to them. And today, just as recently as today, we've been meeting with local people. So we're trying to hit on every level we can and hoping for a response. It's a work in progress. We have time. So we keep fighting the fight. Started out with 100 people yesterday, and that'll keep growing. I think people are interested in solving this once and for all.
Yeah, a lot of people will say the once and for all, and we've had 2 referendums. It's unlikely we'll have a third. I remind people the Policy per Plamondon, if an election were held today, would form a government. We know that separation obviously is, the first thing on his in his menu, if you will. I'm wondering.
It seems like they just keep asking the question until they get the answer they want, right? So.
Well, in his case, I think the difference is, we say that separation, right, or support for referendums in the mid 30%, say 35, 36% on a good day. And I try to remind people that's now, but in 2 years from now, if Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon is as good a politician as he has been up until now, there's no reason to think that number could not be over 40 or 45 or even 50%. So yes, I think we have to be aware of that.
Regardless, the fact of the matter is it's never going to go away, because even if they don't get it now, they're just going to keep trying, right? So we can't say, well, it won't happen this time. Well, yeah, but can we live like this? It's like the people who've had floods, Every time they see the rain clouds coming in, they're worrying about, oh my God, is my basement going to flood? So, you can't live in that state of insecurity and anxiety. And I think it's a really, let's just get ahead of this. Let's part ways. Let's do it amicably. Let's do it peacefully. Let's do it democratically. Everybody can get what they want, and then we don't need to fight anymore.
So just so I understand, and for the listeners, conceivably, you could have different areas within the province, right, depending on their community they happen to be in, declare through a referendum, I guess, whether they wish to remain in Quebec or not, and we would have to honor that, and they could be part of Canada, and others would still be part of an independent Quebec. Is that how it would work?
It would be about staying Canadian. And I think, I don't know if you know this, but after the last referendum in 95, many municipalities actually voted to stay Canadian. They passed resolutions to stay Canadian. Unfortunately, those municipalities are no longer recognized by the provincial government. So what we have to do is this is one of the reasons we have to appeal to the federal government to get some recognition of how to divide up that territory. So it
Colin,
would be poll by poll on a federal level.
Colin, I'm sorry, no, I thought you wanted to say something there.
Yeah, no, just to jump in there, that it's even beyond the brass tacks of how this would work, and the viability of the prospect. It really is highlighting for everyone, federalists or sovereignists or something in between. There are real consequences of even talking about sovereignty. It's not have your cake and eat it too. That there are very real consequences territorially to the population, to use of currency, to the far north. Right, that Quebec would not. If Canada doesn't look the same, neither would Quebec look the same. With people leaving, with people choosing to remain Canadian, with different resources, right? So it's not have your cake and eat it too. So it highlights the real cost of potential sovereignty. Perhaps that's the most important thing that's coming out of this debate.
Just as a final question, I got a couple of text people suggesting, it's kind of pie in the sky. It had come up before the 1995 referendum, and this approach was fear mongering. What do you say to them who think that way?
Well, it's not fear mongering. We're not the ones creating fear.
Yeah, and I bet it's a constructive, constitutional, democratic solution to people who want to take away our rights and freedoms, our ability to remain Canadian with unconstitutional and illegal means. So we're trying to proactively talk about the issues in a constructive, serious manner.
Last question. What's the path going forward, if you will? What's next?
So we've highlighted for leaders. We've sent off a letter to all leaders in June. We sent that all to all members of Parliament. We had our first meeting last night. We had a meeting in person with a member of Parliament today. So we're going to keep on raising awareness. And secondly, meeting with opinion makers to try to actually push this forward in a constructive narrative.
Okay. I thank you both. I appreciate your time this afternoon. Colin Standish, Meertis Fossey from the Canadian Party of Quebec, and this idea of an 11th province. We shall see where this goes.